Welcome all to the next in the series of West of England webinars. London's still been under a stay-at-home order. This is my first time in a shirt and tie in over a year, and my first time hosting a virtual presentation, my first time for Qwest. It's definitely been a year of firsts, so I hope you'll bear with me talking to you from my living room, and this is a very difficult and different experience. Today we will have a brief canter through the basic principles of general average, often referred to as GA, and we'll be ending with Mark Carter from Qwest on an innovative product for owners who find themselves in a GA incident. Any questions should be addressed via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we will take a few of those questions at the end. You will also receive a thank you email from Qwest and can pass any additional questions through the comment section. I will apologise now. On first glance, GA appears somewhat dry and old-fashioned. However, while its roots lie in ancient history, it is particularly relevant today with the events ongoing in Suez. We'll also come across some certain phrases and words which you'll come to recognise and identify with as a sign that the topic of conversation is general average. If I can have the next slide, please, Tom. General average is one of the oldest written rules of maritime law and practice. Historians have documented the existence of general average as far back as AD 553. It's been described in textbooks as an equitable doctrine, which is intended to balance between the owners of property at risk, the cost of any extraordinary sacrifice that have been made, or any extraordinary expenses that have been incurred, in order to avert a peril or to release the property from the grip of a peril that threatens the entire voyage. GA applies by operation of law in some countries, irrespective of contract. However, the vast majority of contracts of carriage will incorporate the York-Antwerp rules, which set out various principles and rules for the adjustment of the various parties' rights. The York-Antwerp rules describe general average succinctly as follows. There is a general average act when and only when any extraordinary sacrifice or expenditure is intentionally and reasonably made or incurred for the common safety for the purposes of preserving from peril the property involved in a common maritime adventure. Today's text can be seen to be a direct relation of the text from AD 553. Any parties making such sacrifice or incurring such expenditure is considered to have conferred a common benefit on all parties to the maritime adventure and is entitled to receive a contribution from other parties. The contribution is based on that proportion of the value of the property saved. The value of the property is generally at the time and place where the common adventure or voyage ends. And next slide, please. Here we can see some of the common properties at risk. If, for example, a cargo is jettisoned in order to prevent the ship getting into difficulty, the owners of the jettisoned cargo are entitled to receive contribution in general average from the owners of the ship, bunkers, containers, or any other property on board towards the value of that jettisoned cargo. Similarly, if the ship has run aground and incurs tug or other salvage assistance in order to refloat the ship and save the cargo, the ship owners are entitled to contribution in general average from the owners of the cargo and any other property that may be at risk towards the cost of towage or salvage services. Next slide, please. There are a number of here we have a list of some of the key features of general average. The underlined words are those that you will see frequently in any discussion or judgment on general average. Because general average is an equitable doctrine which is intended to preserve the rights of all property which is at risk, all interested parties have a right, but the ship owner has a duty to firstly ensure that the general average is declared in appropriate circumstances, that the general average security is obtained from all property at risk before it is released, and the general average adjustment is drawn up. If the ship owner fails to comply with his obligations in this respect, he may be liable to the other interests for any contributions that they should have received and which they have not received as a result of the ship owner's failure. General average sacrifice includes the jettison of cargo carried on deck or the discharging of cargo overboard, damage to machinery in the ship and loss of equipment during attempts to refloat the ship, the loss of freight due to jettison of cargo at risk. General average expenditure normally includes the costs of salvage and necessary repairs, lightering the vessel to enable it to be refloated or repaired, entering, staying at, or leaving a port of refuge, raising the necessary funds to safeguard the overall maritime adventure, and payment of ransom to release ships and cargoes that have been detained by pirates. However, loss or damage sustained by the ship or cargo because of delay does not qualify for general average. Next slide, please. Whilst we have briefly considered the general principles of general average, the rules governing general average are set out in the York-Antwerp rules. These were first introduced in 1864 and which have been regularly updated ever since. These rules have statutory force of law only in some countries and are incorporated by agreement into almost all contracts of carriage and charter parties. Currently, there are 4 versions of the rules in wide circulation. These are referred to as YAR 1974, 94, 2004, and 2016. It is important to establish which version is applicable under the relevant contract of carriage, since there are some material differences between the various rules. The most common version presently in use is YAR 94, although YAR 2016 is gaining traction in the market. It's fair to say that YAR 2004 has not received a universally favourable reaction from the industry, and many clubs and BIMCO have notified their members that they are not advised of their use. The York-Antwerp rules fall into 2 distinct parts. The first part consists of 7 lettered rules set out the general principles we have outlined previously. The second part consists of 22 numbered rules and deals more specifically with the types of sacrifice or expenditure that qualify in general average. The numbered rules are very detailed and complex, and they need to be closely studied in the event of an incident to ensure that the costs of any action that may be taken will qualify for contribution in general average from the other interests at risk. In the event of a conflict, the numbered rules take precedence over the lettered rules. Next slide, please. Ship owners have a duty in appropriate circumstances to declare general average and to notify their assurers and appoint a suitably qualified general average adjuster. Failure to do so may not only incur liability to other interested parties, but may also prejudice the ship owner's insurance cover. Therefore, ship owners should take care to ensure that their contracts of carriage contain suitable general average clauses. Furthermore, a failure by the ship owner to ensure that they take all steps that may be reasonably necessary to protect the ship owner's rights in general average may also cause losses and expenditure which are not insured. An example would be a failure to obtain the necessary security from cargo interest before the cargo is released. A qualified GA adjuster will assist the shipowner when notifying and collecting GA securities from interested parties. The next slide, please. General average contributions become legally enforceable when the cargo is delivered at the final port of discharge, or if the voyage is frustrated at an earlier point in time. However, the general average adjustment is not normally completed until some time later. Therefore, the shipowner has a duty to ensure, before the cargo and other property is released, that security is provided by those interests for any general average contribution that the adjusters may calculate to be payable by them in due course. To assist that process, the shipowners normally have a right to exercise a lien on the property, or to either enforce payment of general average contributions or to obtain the appropriate security. It is not usually necessary to exercise a lien, since the general average adjuster will normally obtain security from the owners of the other property in the form of a cash deposit or a general average bond supported by a general average guarantee. These documents contain a promise by the signatory to pay the appropriate contributions after the adjustment has been completed. Contributions in respect of freight at risk will be borne either by the shipowner and their insurers, or by the cargo owners and their insurers, depending on whether the freight is payable on completion of the voyage or after loading. If freight is payable on completion of the voyage, it will be at the risk of the shipowners, whereas if it's payable in advance after loading and non-returnable, it'll be at the risk of cargo owners. In the latter event, the value of the freight will be included in the value of the cargo, and freight will not contribute separately. Next slide, please. General average contributions from cargo are normally covered by standard cargo policies, such as the ICC clauses, and cargo insurers are normally prepared to put up security for such claims when demanded. However, when the claims for general average contributions are small, the costs of producing a general average adjustment and collecting individual contributions may be uneconomical. It has become common for hull and machinery policies to include a general average absorption clause, which will give the shipowner the option to require the H&M to absorb up to an agreed amount of the claim. General average contributions from ships are normally covered by standard hull and machinery policies, and likewise for other insurers listed, and they're normally prepared to put up security for such claims when demanded. Whilst we've considered various maritime insurances, we have yet to mention P&I insurance. Next slide, please. P&I insurers will normally provide cover for the following claims: general average contributions which are not recoverable from cargo or other interests because the shipowner's breach of a contract of carriage, and general average contributions from the ship which are not recoverable under the hull and machinery policy because the valuation of the ship for the purposes of the general average is deemed to be higher than the sum insured under the policy. However, such cover may be available only if the P&I insurer exercises discretion to provide cover in that particular case. Cover available under the Qwest Rule 2, Section 17 for claims that the member has for contributions to general average, special charges or salvage that would have been recoverable by the member from the other parties, but for the fact the incident has been caused by an actionable fault of the member, and that is a breach of the contract of carriage by the member as carrier. In many cases, the relevant breach is a breach of the member's duty as carrier under the Hague-Visby or Hamburg rules to exercise due diligence to make the ship seaworthy before and at the beginning of the voyage, or to properly load, stow, care for the cargo during the voyage. The Qwest Rules 2, Section 17b GA must be adjusted in accordance with the York Antwerp rules, otherwise cover is limited to exposure had a GA been adjusted under the York Antwerp rules 1974. And finally, section 18 of the Qwest rules, ship's proportion of general average, special charges or salvage not recoverable under the hull machinery policy solely by reason of the sound value of an insured vessel having been assessed at a value in excess of the amount for which the vessel should have been insured. Next slide, please. Here we have a very basic GA calculation. In a situation like the one pictured, an engine failure followed by a shift of deck cargo, the vessel and voyage are in imminent danger. For the safety of all, the master jettisons some of the deck cargo and the vessel is taken under tow to a port of refuge. The jettison cargo, in this case, has a value of $135,000. The towage to the port of the refuge, $45,000, and the freight lost on the jettison cargo, $21,000. The freight market for timber deck cargoes was particularly buoyant at this time. As you can see from the calculation, the losses incurred would total $201,000. In the next part of the calculation, the contributory values are listed, making a total of $2,010,000. A very simple proportion calculation is then taken place to find a percentage which is applied to the loss, given the ship's proportion, freight proportion, and cargo portion. As I said before, GA sacrifice must be intentional, reasonable, and successful, and you should always refer to the key features of GA. Not listed on this calculation are special charges, which are expenditures which are incurred in safeguarding or preserving property, even where there is no common danger to the maritime adventure. The most common example is an expenditure incurred initially by shipowners in storing damaged cargo ashore. Such charges are not subsequently shared between other members of the common adventure, but are ultimately borne in full solely by the cargo owners. We'll now look at where P&I sits in this. Next slide, please. If the cause of an incident is one for which the carrier is exempted from liability under the terms of the contract of carriage or the applicable law, there is no actionable fault which entitles the contributing interests to refuse to make such contributions, and consequently cover is not available under Rule 2, Section 17. However, since it is often difficult to establish clearly whether or not there is liability on the part of the member, the legal cost that the member may incur in pursuing a claim against cargo interest for contribution are normally recoverable under legal costs part of the policy. Similarly, cover is not available under Rule 2, Section 17 if the member has waived exemptions or other rights of protection in the contract of carriage, which are there and designed to protect him against liability, with the result that cargo and other interests have the right to refuse to contribute in general average. That is, of course, unless the association has previously approved the relevant terms or similar terms. Clubs generally recommend that the new Jason clause is inserted into all charter parties, bills of lading, waybills, and other contracts containing or evidencing the contract of carriage. This is required to preserve owners' entitlement to claim general average contributions from cargo interests who would otherwise, under US law, be able to avoid contributing where there has been a faulty navigation or management of the ship. The rules make it clear that cover is not available for losses which result from the fact that the member has admitted to use such recommended terms. Therefore, should members have any doubts, about the effect of contractual terms, they are strongly advised to consult the association before agreeing those terms. Cover is not available for liabilities, loss, costs or expenses that the member cannot recover from other parties to the maritime adventure in general average, but which would have been recoverable if the unamended York-Antwerp rules had been incorporated into the charter parties or contracts of carriage. I'm now, next slide, please. I'm now going to hand you over to Mark, who will discuss the general average policy with Qwest.
Adrian, thank you, and morning, everybody. Adrian's done all the hard work. My job now is simply to explain a little bit in a short period about Qwest general average. This is Qwest, a joint venture between the West and Casualty Consultants Sea Solutions. And our job is to provide innovative solutions to problems that ship owners may face, which are currently not addressed by other traditional products. So in short, what Qwest will do is, if the ship owner has out-of-pocket expenses which are part of general average, there is then the complicated average adjustment process, which can take months and sometimes years. During that time, the ship owner is out of pocket for those expenses, and that can severely affect the ship owner's cash flow. What Qwest general average can do is to cover those costs on the basis that when the average adjustment is paid, then those costs are repaid to Qwest. The idea is to help the ship owner with his cash flow during that period, and it can be a long period as claims are adjusted by the adjuster. In a normal sort of incident involving maybe 3 or 4 cargo owners, it can take a long time. Just imagine what it might take if general average is declared on the Ever Given in the Suez right now, 20,000 containers on board. It may not be because of the number of cargo interests, but if it is, you can imagine the complexity of the average adjuster's job and the time that it will take. During that time, Qwest is able to help, and that is done on a confidential basis and at competitive rates compared to loans or financing elsewhere, such as with a traditional bank. So you see there our product information sheet. More than happy to talk some more about that. And if you'd like to contact us, then our details of the website and our personal contact details there are there for you to use. Please do so. And thank you very much for listening.
Yes, and I was just going to jump back in with regard to the ongoing incident in Suez, and I would refer everybody back to the key features of GA. And an act must be incurred in the interest of common safety in order to preserve the voyage, and it must be a grave and imminent peril. The act must be intentional, reasonable, and successful. So if we look at the current incident in the Suez, the act would be the removal of the vessel to a safe place using tugs and that. I would say they were intentional, reasonable, and hopefully will be successful. The real question we will have to answer, or not us, but the parties involved, is whether is the one of grave and imminent danger. It's purely speculation at this time, but I'm sure we can all consider whether that would be where she is at the moment, and that is a grave and imminent danger. And as Mark mentioned, the Ever Given has a listed capacity of 20,124 20-foot equivalent units. So that's 20,000 GA bonds and guarantees, and a mammoth task for a GA adjuster, and would be a very sizable GA adjustment. Because if you consider that each party, so let's say there is two containers of Nike trainers on board. If they want their cargo back, they're going to have to provide a GA bond and guarantee. They're also going to have to advise the value of that cargo to the GA adjuster. And every party on board is going to have to do that and provide the values of the cargoes. Now, for somebody like Nike, that's not a big problem, but the growth in container trade has meant that many small sole traders and individual parties are shipping products around the world, not big conglomerates. And that can be the real challenge. And potentially this vessel may need to go to dry dock afterwards. So that would mean the removal of all the containers on board and their storage. I'm fairly sure that Suez probably doesn't have the capacity to hold 20,000 containers for a long period of time. So there's immense challenges in it with these larger vessels. So, you know, it's one that we will have to all watch with some interest. We had another question there referring to the maritime adventure. The maritime adventure is generally designed as from commencement of the voyage to the end of the voyage. Now, if a vessel calls at multiple ports, that's still part of the maritime adventure. But if you have an incident at the second discharge port, you would not be able to include the first discharge port's cargo in the GA, because that's already gone and they're no longer part of that maritime adventure. So that's the answer to that one. And I think so. Somebody asked with regard to the Ever Given stranded in the Suez Canal will now exceed 54%. I have no idea how much it's going to cost in Suez, but it won't be in the tens of thousands, I wouldn't think. So that's all the questions answered that are on there. Oh, somebody's asked, is there a conflict between P&I and Hull and Machinery? I've not come across any conflicts on this. Potentially the issue of conflict is vessel value, but that's generally done by the GA adjuster rather than P&I and Hull and Machinery. And if there is a conflict, it generally is sorted out in a negotiation between the two parties. Well, I think that's us done that. Unless Mark has anything to add, I'd like to thank you all for attending and for being gentle with me.
Thanks, Adrian.